Real honor, and I've had a great experience learning from all of the other presenters here today. So Calvert Foundation is an impact investing nonprofit, and we enable people to invest for social good in order to create a more sustainable and equitable society. And what we do is we raise money from investors, from retail investors, from accredited investors, from institutional investors, through the sale of a retail investment product. It's a fixed income product called the Community Investment Note. And we take that money and we invest it globally, both here in the U.S., about 60% of our portfolio is in the U.S., and internationally, around the world in high-impact funds, intermediaries, and enterprises that have an intentional social as well as a financial return. In the U.S., we invest in things like affordable housing and small business. Internationally, we've historically invested in things like microfinance and sustainable agriculture and fair trade. So Calvert Foundation has a strong track record of success in an 18-year history. We've raised more than $1 billion from over 13,000 investors and repaid all of our investors 100% of principal and interest. As you can see, we have a real range of investment sizes. We've had people who invest from $20 to $20 million. And that is because the product that we sell, the Community Investment Note, is very unique, and it's highly, highly accessible. So it is the only impact investing product in the U.S. that trades, retail impact investing product in the U.S. that trades electronically, meaning that you or your financial advisor can purchase and hold a community investment note in your brokerage account. You can also log on and purchase a community investment note for as little as $20 through our online investment portal, vested.org. And so this accessibility of the Community Investment Note is critical to our mission, which is really to change the way people think about the power of their individual assets and to get people to align their investment capitals with their values. And so through this lens, our investment product is really more than just an investment product, right? It's a tool to connect people with the communities that they care about. And so at Calvert Foundation, over the past few years, we've been thinking a lot about how do you get people to do that, right? How do you motivate people to move their investment dollars in line with their values? And what are the causes and the places that motivate people to do this? And so we've been implementing a new strategy around issue-based investment initiatives to address that question. And in 2012, we launched our Win-Win initiative, which is the Women Investing in Women initiative. It was a $20 million portfolio that invested in projects and organizations that contributed to women's economic empowerment around the world. This past week at the Clinton Global Initiative, we launched the second round of Win-Win, which will be investing an additional $20 million specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, focused on women and access to clean household technologies, particularly around clean cook stoves, which have had sort of an outsized impact on women's health and livelihoods. Another domestic initiative that we launched is the Ours to Own initiative, which enables people to invest in the local community development projects in the cities that they live and work and love. We launched our first 2 cities in Denver and the Twin Cities, and we'll be launching about 3 more in the coming years. And another issue that we think is extremely important, and the reason that I am here today, is diaspora investing. I think we all heard the stats today, and you've probably heard them repeated many times about the number of, the level of remittances and the level of diaspora savings. There's been a particular interest from governments and development financial institutions over the past several years in sort of harnessing and leveraging diaspora investment flows. And so we are currently working on a feasibility study to figure out how we can use our platform to leverage diaspora investment capital, being that we have one of the few retail investment products that invests in international development. So it will work in the same way as the initiatives that I explained before, where we will create a portfolio focused on a specific country or a region, and then issue out our community investment note branded particular to that country. So you could imagine a Kenya community investment note or a Mexico community investment note. So our note really offers a way for a diaspora to invest back in their country of heritage that's outside of remittances, that's outside of philanthropy, but in addition to those capital flows and complementary to them as well. And so our diaspora note also, I just wanted to say, it really has the ability it's not only a tool for development, but a way to sort of create a sense of ownership and a sense of identity and around that as well. And importantly, represents an opportunity for us to really diversify the impact investing community as well. And so in the course of our work around this diaspora investment, we partnered with the Department of State and USAID around an initiative called IDEA, which is the International Diaspora Engagement. Alliance. And the idea was launched back in 2010 by then Secretary Hillary Clinton as a platform to harness the energy and the resources of diaspora communities for a wide range of development and diplomatic purposes. And idea focuses on a variety of channels, investment and entrepreneurship being one, but also philanthropy, volunteerism, diplomacy, capacity building, that really speak to the importance of engaging the diaspora through multiple different channels and across different issue areas that can really complement and strengthen each other. So we've been working hard to make IDEA a true resource and a partner for diaspora communities, both for investment and beyond. So next month, October 12th through 18th, will be Global Diaspora Week, which is a week dedicated to diaspora communities and their contributions around the world. So the Global Diaspora Week was launched in response to feedback from participants in the Global Diaspora Forum, which some of you may have attended, that the Department of State has hosted over the past few years. And what participants really started asking for was more specific events that were tailored to the issues and the causes that they cared about, in addition to events, in other places outside of Washington, D.C. So this year, IDEA asked diaspora groups to really take the reins and organize events on the topics and the issues that were important to them. And so we can really highlight the great work that's being done on the ground by these diaspora organizations themselves. So anyone can participate in Global Diaspora Week. The events can be anything from a meeting at a coffee shop to an economic forum, and we have sort of everything in between right now. We have over 60 events that will be taking place during Global Diaspora Week. I left some forms up in the front and would encourage you to take a look at them. I know that Jeanette and Caddis are hosting at least 2 events during the week. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that as well. And on some of the other fronts that IDEA is working on, we will be launching a group on Micro Mentor later this month, which is almost like a dating website for entrepreneurs and mentors. It's free to join, and you can search for mentors based on geography, on sector, expertise, and language. The platform is available in English, French, and Spanish. And we hope that IDEA members will be getting on that platform and sharing their talent and getting advice. One of the other areas that IDEA is also focused on is capacity building for diaspora organizations. Last month in August, we, with CUSO International and Accenture, hosted a webinar on strategic planning for diaspora organizations. And this, we hope, is the first in a series of webinars focused on touching on different capacity building topics that diaspora organizations think are important. So if you haven't signed up already, I would encourage you to go to the IDEA website, which is diasporaalliance.org, and become an IDEA member. It is free, and you can follow along with some of the work and hopefully participate in a lot of the work that we're doing. So thank you all very much for your time. I know I'm the only thing standing in between you and lunch, so on that, I will close.
I'm going to let Mr. Konate speak a little bit about what the ministry does or has in project for Ivorians living abroad. Is that okay with you? Okay.
Thanks very much for giving us the opportunity to talk to you guys. Coming here, we are really proud to come here from Côte d'Ivoire. Mrs. Jeanette Leguil sent a letter to the President of Côte d'Ivoire, President Alassane Ouattara, and the letter obviously was sent back to the Minister of African Integration and Nationals Living Abroad. And we were given the opportunity to represent them at this special occasion. We are extremely proud to be here just to support Mrs. Jeanette Leguil for what she's doing for the community, but also to say that the state is organizing itself to try to support the Ivorian living outside of our country. You know, in Ivorians outside of the country today, our nationals living abroad is estimated to be around 1,240,000, and it's about 60% of those live in France. About 21% of those live here in the US, with 8% living in Italy, and another 8% living in Great Britain. So we are trying, at the membership of the president, to organize the diaspora to make sure they have an access to housing in Côte d'Ivoire, also help them in terms of investment back home, and also trying to protect them as much as we can. What we're trying to do is how to think carefully about what we can do for the Ivorian diaspora. So in March 2015, we would be organizing a big forum in Côte d'Ivoire, which would call on all the Ivorian delegates to come from outside of, everywhere from the world and come and discuss some of the main issues to how to best integrate it in the process of the development of our country. Ivory Coast is one of the greatest countries on earth. We have more than 10% growth rate, and I mean the US should be a bit jealous from our growth at the moment, and also even Germany. So, I mean, there are a lot of things we do. We can also, we have the second biggest basilica in the world, and we have a very united population after all the problems we had. So what we are here for is just to say thank you also to Mrs. Leguil for everything she's done, and to try to talk to the Ivorian community about what we're trying to do to best organize them. And it's a great honor for us. With everything we've followed since the beginning here, I have learned a lot. Mrs. Ouattara Coulibaly with me here, so we've also learned a lot, and would also like to share some of the PP presentation, PowerPoint presentation you guys made. This will also allow us to have best practice in some of the things we can best do in our country. I thank you very much for listening. I hope you all enjoyed the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce, we're going to go a little bit outside of the normal agenda and on the schedule for this panel 2 discussion. Mr. Ortez has to catch a flight, and we're going to go out of the program. Mr. Ortez is Senior Policy Advisor on Active Citizenship for Oxfam, and that he's going to give a presentation on active citizenship, transparency, and accountability for extractive industries.
Thank you, the lessons that I wanna present and some of the opportunities for improving pro-poor public expenditures are mostly from Ghana, but I'm going to share a few examples from other places where similar types of efforts have been made. Are there any West Africans here? Ghanaians? Any Ghanaians? No? Well, great. So Ghanaians, perfect. So you will hear a little bit about your country with a lot of respect. Anyway, let's start. So let's begin with examples. Let's go some hands-on and see what active citizens are able to do when they make efforts to hold spending, particularly pro-poor spending, accountable. For example, comes from the Philippines, and the organization there is Gwatch. It's an example on public procurement of textbooks. So, what was the problem? Through the decade of the 90s, the Department of Education is regularly accused of corruption, particularly on the issue of procurement of textbooks, and that's signaled out in the public domain. You know, issues like overpriced contracts to unqualified bidders, suppliers that are not arriving where they are supposed to, and yet they have been paid for, and of course books of poor quality. And this is an example. You know, 21% of the books that were supposed to go to elementary schools that were in rural areas were not reaching that place. So what were the actions that active citizens did? In 2003, there's a reform champion within government. There's a new education department anti-corruption textbook corruption program that gets built by this reformer. And the interesting thing is that Gwatch, the organization, provides a good reputation. You know, acknowledges that this program is actually working well, and because of that, it attracts a broader movement of groups, including the Boys and Girl Scouts and faith-based community groups, to join. So, you know, there's a lot of momentum building. And this is how the Boy Scouts advertise their support to textbook count. So what are the results? As a result of all that campaigning, more competitive bidding process is now monitoring by vast national networks of organizations. Books that are defective are identified and replaced through inspections of printing presses and warehouses, and the problem of delivery and distribution gets improved. And here you see community in actions, you know, looking and expecting delivery of books and making sure that things are working well. So that's the Philippines example. Now let's go to Mexico. The organization that is Fundar, this is a more complex problem. It's auditing and making legislative officials oversee and get involved in some issues that have been identified in a fund that is supposed to go to HIV/AIDS program. So what's the problem? In 2002, Congress in Mexico approves a 600 million pesos for the National Health Program. It's an increase. And there's 30 million pesos originally allocated for HIV/AIDS that are diverted to a different program. Organizations that have been working on the HIV/AIDS issue identify this problem. So what actions do they take? Fundar, the organization leading the efforts there, builds a coalition that includes women's health, gender budgeting, and HIV/AIDS advocates. The coalition uses freedom of information law. Mind on that, there is a freedom of information law in Mexico, and civil society uses it to get all the transactions that were made by the Ministry of Health to Provida, which is actually an NGO that got a lot of funding from the Ministry of Health. When that data gets audited by civil society, a lot of problems emerge, and then the Ministry of Health has a difficult time sitting down to discuss the problems. So what the groups do is that they do target media campaign, and that targeted media campaign pressures the Ministry of Health to meet and discuss the findings of the audit. So what are the results of this? Well, the coalition becomes a nationwide of 1,000 organizations across the country petitioning to investigate further, and then that gets the internal controller, you know, a state agency, to get involved, and the Supreme Auditor, another state agency, to get involved, and that the auditor actually fines Provida for 13 million pesos, and they ask them to return the funds, as well as ban Provida from getting public funds for 15 years. So those are two very concrete examples outside of Africa of what active citizenship can achieve when they try to keep track of pro-poor public investments. So what is this thing of active citizenship and what does it have to do with development? Here's basically the proposition that we have. In reality, the ones that do development in countries is the government and their citizens, is institutions and active citizens. I mean, citizens everywhere are asked to pay taxes, vote, identify what are the national needs that need to be met, and in return for those taxes and those actions, governments and effective states particularly are supposed to provide basic goods, security, human rights, functioning markets, and accountability for all of that. That virtuous cycle between active citizenship and effective states is what really holds development over the long run. And that is what, through our work and the examples that I'm going to lay out, we're trying to do. We're trying to strengthen that compact between active citizenship and effective states to make both of them more effective in development. But of course, our focus is on strengthening the active citizens. So what are these active citizens? These are well-informed and equipped with relevant information, right? So it's not just people that want to agitate. It's people that want to learn more about how these resources are being invested in their communities, in their region, in their country. They are motivated to self-mobilize to demand accountability to do the better. So it's knowledge plus actions equal power. They are locally engaged, but also globally connected. That's where diasporas are important, because they do have that local to global connection. So let me talk now a little bit about the public resource chain and these challenges to pro-poor expenditures that we have in Ghana. So, the kind of resources that we're particularly tracking are three. Revenue flows that come from extractive industries, because that's a huge amount of resources that are coming and are projected to come in Ghana on that. Aid is still relevant in Ghana, as in many other African countries, particularly because it goes into capital expenditures that usually the national budget does not cover. National budgets in most of these countries go into wages. And then when you want to build infrastructure, when you want to expand school, build clinics, all that kind of stuff, other additional resources that go into that kind of capital investment become important. And aid is important because of that. But then, of course, domestic taxes as well. And there are other teams within Oxfam that are working on making those revenue flows more transparent and accountable. But then comes, once those revenues get into the national budget, how are they used? How are they spent by different agencies and different line ministries? And more importantly, how do they translate into service delivery? And that's what active citizenship is about in the way that we're considering it. It's tracing public spending in ways that make it more transparent and accountable for results to citizens. There are a number of international initiatives, some of them by World Bank or IMF, others like the Open Budget Partnership, that are trying to make this chain become more transparent and accountable. And let me point at IARI and EITI as two initiatives that are trying to work particularly on extractives and on aid to make it more transparent and accountable. Ultimately, it's the whole public resource chain, the one that needs to be transparent and accountable, because the problem is that if you make, it's the squeezing the balloon problem. If you make corrupt practices less likely, let's say at the budget creation process, but you don't work on service delivery, here's where you'll get the corruption. If you get spending at line ministries more transparent, but this is not being matched by policies at the national level, you might get improvements here, but there are problems here and here. So you gotta work across the whole public resource chain. So how do we do that? Or, sorry, let's get into some of the particular issues that, problems that Ghana has. Let's talk a little bit about the budget. Are you guys familiar with the Open Budget Survey? It ranks countries in terms of transparency of their budgets, of their national budgets. Something to watch. It's online. You can find this information. It's available. Well, in that index, Ghana ranks number 50, which means that it has some transparency. You know, look what other West African countries rank as. You know, Nigeria is 16. I mean, the best grade that you can get is 100. Ghana is 50, so it's kind of like in the middle. Some transparency, not huge. But look at Nigeria, 16. Liberia, 43. Equatorial Guinea, 0. What are the issues in Ghana that give it that 50 rate? The pre-budget statement, which is, you know, the intention that the government has of how much money they're going to spend, does not get published. There's no document on that. A citizen's budget, which is a non-technical, more easy to digest, easy to understand presentation of the intent of the budget, not produced. This year, in 2014, they have produced it, but still not there. You know, it's an improvement, but not quite what it should be. And the year-end report, the one that compares what was supposed to be spent with what was actually spent, you know, to reconcile what we promised to do and what we actually did, not produced. So those are the kinds of issues that are giving Ghana that 50 rating on the budget. But there are some openings. There are some interesting things that are happening in Ghana that continuous advocacy and campaigning can even expand more. There is a legislation on disclosure of oil and gas payments, and that's setting a positive precedent. And because this information is being disclosed, now we know that for 2014, there is a $700 million in the national budget coming from oil and gas. And we know that that money is particularly important also for capital spending, the same that aid. You know, a lot of projects that are being funded for building schools, rural roads, and those kinds of things are being funded with those resources. So we know that because of this legislation that mandates, but you don't have that in the mining sector. So gold, we don't know what the government gets, and therefore it's not possible to trace it. Ghana produces, I was learning from a partner, Ghana produces per capita, on a per capita basis, as much gold as South Africa. South Africa has used a lot of its gold to develop economic infrastructure, which is quite well in South Africa. Ghana, not quite there. So there is efforts now to broaden this legislation so that it includes disclosures of payments on the mining sector as well. Okay, another opening that gives some political feasibility to some of the work that we're trying to do. This is the Millennium Challenge Corporation, the MCC, and the MCC is interested in meeting the IATI protocol that I was mentioning before, that protocol establishes regular information that needs to be published by donors that can actually match the lines of the national budget, so that citizens that look at this would look at information on investments coming from the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And by the way, a compact has been signed, or is about to be signed on the MCC for the next 5 years in Ghana. So very interesting development to follow here. And then the financial crisis by which the country is going right now, it's actually an opportunity, because the IMF bailout that is now being negotiated could open up the possibility of establishing additional legislation and additional measures that would make public financial management more transparent and accountable in the country. And we are working on that as well. The other thing that is important for this kind of work is to have a counterpart. You know, some of the previous presenters were saying that it is important to have a multi-stakeholder engagement in these kinds of things. It doesn't matter if you have citizens asking questions if the state is not willing to respond and provide information. So there is some ongoing strengthening of some public accounting systems. There's a project called Giftness in Ghana that is doing precisely that. And if it's pushed further, it could go into, in the next couple of years, publishing more detailed information by sector, by geographic area, on where the money is going. So that's another opening that is worth continuing to push. And finally, there are some institutional openings that are happening at groups that are tracking money from the district assembly levels, at the local level, connecting with some of the policies that are being pushed from the national level by some of these actors. Okay, so what's ultimately our theory of how this change can happen and what kinds of actions we are taking on this? So ultimately what we want is more pro-poor investments, right? And for that, we need public spending to be transparent and accountable. The active citizens are going to be effective if they are well informed, if they are engaged in policy and service delivery monitoring, and over the course of that engagement, they become more influential. You know, they gain more political space to do that. That happens only if you're able to establish global, local, and national connections around these issues. In politically open environments, which is the case of Ghana, you can push for actual institutional reforms and compliance for some of those reforms. I also follow a country that is less open politically than Ghana. I follow Cambodia. And in that country, we are focusing most, which is more closed, we're focusing most on protecting civil society space, so some human rights work there, as well as international, as well as institutional reform. In Ghana, how does that look in practice? So this is where I spend my time on, and some of my colleagues. Let me just give a quick overview. These are the core networks that we're strengthening in Ghana. One that is looking at the local level work, at the national level work, to disentangle where those $700 million are going in terms of concrete projects of roads or education or health, and publishing that information, so that groups at the local level, so that groups at the local level here can actually mobilize, use that information, and then trace if it's going to agriculture, to health, education in the local governments. Now, sometimes, in order to make this chain work, we need to bring some of these groups that are doing the national level tracking and the local level tracking to discuss issues in Washington, or to discuss issues with these donors, or to actually talk to government, to parliament, or to the Auditor General, to give the feedback on how well those things are happening. And that's what that is the system of reinforcing, that we're trying to support. So, what does success look like? Let me give you an example of the Oil for Food campaign that we launched last year. The problem there, you're familiar with the scheme, the problem there was that the Ghana oil exports, which amount for $1 billion per year in the next 20 years, there's the big question of, will public revenue from oil go to support sustainable and inclusive development? A lot of questions about that. The civil society groups that are in the oil platform, which is about 100 member associations, currently advocate for more transparent management of the oil revenues. And they did a campaign that was targeting farmers to collect, and they ended collecting about 20,000 signatures of farmers petitioning to increase oil revenue investments for small farmers and rural development. They took it to Parliament, and 15% of oil revenues for the 2014 budget is now pledged for agriculture modernization. And 94% of that allocation is going to go to alleviate poverty with small-scale farmers. This budget, this current year budget. And here is all the farmers giving Parliament in Ghana the 20,000 signatures that led to the approval of this change in legislation. And that is going to improve seeds, improve extension services, access to credit, access to markets, and small-scale agro-processing. This is what active citizenship can do. So how do you measure if we're getting there? If you're an organization that is working on these things, well, do you have voice? Can you express ideas and preferences of where public resources are going and how institutions are working? Can you vet? Can you analyze, evaluate public documents, information on public finances to understand where those resources are going? You can assess if your organization is being able to do that. Can you vote? Can you actually have a vote on practices that are emerging and on policies that are affecting you? And finally, the greatest test of citizenship power is, can you actually even reject a policy or a proposal and request changes to it? We also have more hard measures of how this type of approach work. In the case, the way that we are trying to self-assess if we are doing our jobs well is, are these citizens and networks actually increasing their influence and their capacities? Are there more organizations doing tracking of sector expenditures? Is revenue accountability improving, in these extractive payments or domestic taxes? Are we improving on the IATI protocol by donors or tracing extractive industries revenue into the budgets? Are pro-poor expenditures accounted for and measured by increases in agriculture, health, and education spending, as well as organizations providing feedback to authorities on how well those are being spent? And finally, is the public financial system itself improving over time through this feedback that citizens are giving to authorities? That's kind of our model of work. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Yes. As several years ago in Ghana, the oil and gas platform of civil society was not formed. It formed as a result of efforts by civil society groups to try to put in place a legislation that would help them to track the revenues that were coming from that sector. What some of these local to global connections helped to do was to request, let's say, analysis of what were the best legislations that could be put in place so that those revenues would be traced. The suggestion of the creation of PIAC, which is a commission, a mixed commission of private sector, government, and civil society groups that are tracing revenues. They are the ones that bring to the public and publish all that information. So all of that did not exist 4 years ago. It was set in place through the efforts of citizens with allies in country and outside the country to set all those structures in place. Yeah. And actually PIAC and the oil and gas platform, as well as that legislation, my understanding is that it's being copied in other places in Africa. I wouldn't be able to say a list of countries, but I heard that from people from the World Bank that work in other countries and know of initiatives similar to that. Tanzania is one country that is looking at what Ghana did, because they also are in the process of analyzing what the extraction of oil and gas will be in their country. And Kenya, I believe, is another country that is looking into something like this. Yeah.
I was just wondering, what is it about these countries, like Ghana or Tanzania? What do you see from you're looking at them? What distinguishes them from, let's say, Angola or Nigeria? What's the difference? What is it about them?
About
About these countries that we will have an openness and accountability. What is the difference among the people? Is it the culture? What is it about them?
Yeah. Well, it's an interplay. It's an interplay between voice, let me call it that way, and teeth, let me call it that way. So by voice, what I mean is that citizens get organized, get knowledgeable about issues, sophisticated knowledge. The gas sector is complicated, for instance, and you need NGOs or groups that are able to do good research, good analysis on what the resources are. But then it needs to be met by teeth. And what I mean by teeth is that you need to have reformers in government that are interested in, and they may not be people that have a lot of power in government, but precisely because they don't have a lot of power in government, they are interested in dialoguing with groups that will empower them by being public and being more voiceful. But both of them are needed, in order to get a virtuous cycle going on.
The degree of literacy, does that change at all?
I wouldn't say that's a big issue. We're talking about sometimes things that happen at capitals in countries, and initially they happen at capital in country, but in the case of Ghana, when what we're tracing in terms of investments going to the local level, then we are talking about local associations, women's organizations, organizations of people with disabilities, which are tracing the money that are supposed to be going to clinics, to schools, and that kind of thing. So at the national level, it takes connecting the dots between national groups and very local community-based groups. Yeah. No, these are transnational. There are some national companies that are exploring that are exploiting oil and gas in Ghana, but by large, it's international companies. We're talking about royalties being paid to the government of Ghana by international corporations.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Yes.
Right now, I'm going to introduce our next presenter, and she is our keynote speaker for this session, and that's Ms. Barbara Bradford. She's the president and CEO of DMG3 Enterprises Incorporated, and she is going to be discussing project development, how to plan, finance, and execute a construction development in Africa.
Good afternoon. Okay. Well, I have a few questions before I get started of you. How many of you are entrepreneurs? How many of you are doing work currently in Africa or on the continent? And how many of you are between the ages of 35 and say 25 and 35? 2. Wonderful. Glad to see you here. I'm Gina Bradford, and I want to go over a little bit about what I do and how I got to doing business in Africa, but more importantly, how to plan, finance, and execute a construction development project while negotiating those idiosyncratic cultural and political differences. First of all, I am founder and CEO of my company. I've been in business for several years. For the last 6 years, have consistently worked hard to put all of my eggs in Africa. So I haven't done work in the United States in 6 years. I've been in design and development for over 25 years. I'm a graduate architect. Here in the U.S., I have managed more than $800 million worth of construction development projects. And currently, now on the continent, I have more than $2 billion worth of work that has been awarded and actually funded. We just got funding. I don't want to go through the particulars of my background. I've been on zoning and building, building boards, building official, vice president, executive planner. I worked in public and private. I love this work. I love what I do. And how I got into this was about 6 years ago. A friend of mine who works in ministry knew of me doing work development in Dallas, Texas. And she called and she says, Gina, I'm in Liberia, and you really need to talk to these people. They really need your help. And I'm thinking she's meaning ministry, because I have worked in ministry. And so I didn't really hear that first there. So she came back in 2008 and she visited me in Southern California. And she says, no, they really need your help in their rebuilding efforts. She said, I have a pastor who, he and his community have 500 acres on the ocean, and they really need housing. They need schools. They need hospitals. And I'm thinking, really? I can help with that. I've been doing this for more than 25 years. And so I began to think about the work that I was doing in LA. Like I said, I'd been in my own business. I had a consulting contract with LAUSD, which is the school district there. And that contract was ending. And my so-called partner, employer partner per se, they wanted me to work on the Los Angeles Community College District Energy Conservation Program, which I had implemented a program in Dallas, Texas at their public schools. Only thing was, they wanted me to work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. for 6 months straight. And I thought, wow, why am I making them continuously wealthy And I know the work. I've been doing this myself in Dallas and here in LA. And then my friend Sonia, who was telling me you really should look in Liberia, I decided, you know what, maybe I should. But it started out for me as ministry, helping them, because I knew that I could help. I've been doing this for the back, like the back of my hand for years. So as I began to talk to the pastor there, tried to come up with some solutions, I realized the one thing was funding was going to be the key. So over the years, especially for the last 4 years, I have actually earned an MBA in international financing, trying to find and figure out how to help people that are wanting to do developments. Now I'm getting off key because I wanted to tell you that story to actually give you some introduction of how I actually started and got interested in Africa. This is my very first project as an entrepreneur. This project was a $100 million church development. It started out as me being really on the building team for the church. And the pastor at the time had been trying for a few years, trying to get this building team together so that they could execute his vision. And I went to him and said, Pastor Haynes, you know, I can do this. I had been the executive planner for Dallas Public Schools, and my ex-husband and I had always done work on the side, and that became my business. And so for 4 or 5 years, I worked with the pastor, the congregation, and the stakeholders, and this 20-acre development has come into existence. It opened up January 2007. So this is my baby. This is the project that I've done here in the United States. And so I wanted to tell you this is because they took a chance with me. He saw my passion. He knew that I could do the work, but also he wanted to give me an opportunity because I was an African American. And so many of the status quo didn't see the dollars and cents and how it made good business sense to really take the time to work with a church, and particularly a church that was growing and wanted to do all these different things. So with that said, it's not easy working with a client that doesn't have the funding, doesn't have the structure in place to even understand how to pull a development together. And so what you have to do sometimes is bundle, and sometimes you have to step outside the box to make sure that your client can get that end product that they need. So let's see, I just wanted to show you that, and I'm going to continue on forging. If you're going to do work in Africa, and I know a lot of you know this, and for the ones that don't know, I'm not sure if you're actually doing work there or not, you have to go on the ground. You have to get on the ground and you have to assess the needs. You have to figure out, what is it that they need? How can that problem be solved? What are my capabilities, and how can I meet that need? I'm a firm believer that everyone who has been placed here on this earth has a gift. And somewhere there's a problem where your gift can meet that need. You just have to figure out exactly where that is and where your zip code is. My zip code happens to be in Africa. And I know it's many zip codes, but my zip code is there. In order to build this firm foundation, you have got to get your assessments right in the beginning, because the assessments form that foundation, and that's how you're going to be able to build. So understanding what your client's needs are and being able to find a component that fits that need is key. It's very important. So I don't know what's happening with this PowerPoint, but anyway, you have to go on the ground. Like I said, you have to get your feet wet. You cannot do business here by say voicemail and fax and email. You really do have to go there and get on the ground, immerse yourself, understand the people, understand that community, and figure out what it is that's actually needed. And then once you do that, you look and you figure out where's that gap. You know, how can I bridge that missing component? So, you know, once you determine what your missing part is, you really have to think out of the box. And sometimes, especially doing work here in the United States, we're so used to having a bid process, especially in my field, the bid process, or you have a client who have a program of needs already established. Well, there's so many different needs and so many different areas that you can go into. You really are the person who's going to push that along and figure out what those needs are. So you're going to have to step out of the box sometimes. That means really doing a whole lot of hard work, extra work that you probably don't normally do. And then you come back and you bundle that solution. Whatever that missing piece is, how am I going to see this project through fruition? What is the first step, and how do I get to that last steps? And if I can't provide that particular solution, who can I partner with, who can I joint venture with to make it happen? More importantly, though, you really have to have a passion for what you do. If I didn't have a passion for really creating space and seeing a development that could help people, I would not be doing work in Africa. It's hard work. It's not easy at all. And therefore, that's why I have my motto, my tagline is changing lives throughout the world in the built environment, because I truly believe that when you have that passion, you can change lives. Okay, so once you go there and you come back, or even while you're still there, you're sitting there and you got to come up with a strategy. The first thing you do is come up with your design and construction, the type of process that you need to come up with. Which type of process am I going to use? Is it going to be a design build? Is it going to be contracted out totally to someone? But whatever process you choose, this affects the funding. This affects what type of financing you're going to have. And then you come up with your project team. That is so, so, so important. I can't hire people who don't have a heart for Africa. I mean, that's just, you just can't hire people, or you can't even hire a firm who doesn't have the heart for the people. So it's very important that you get a team who is committed to the work. And also, during this strategic session, you're talking to your stakeholders and you're asking them what schedule, what's the timeline that you want to complete this. And then, of course, cost, the type of contract, and turnkey. And when I say turnkey, rooted to the tutor, we say, from cradle to grave. That's what I'm used to doing, making sure that our clients come up with the idea. In fact, Pastor Haynes used to have this vision of having a pyramid and a Nile River. He's very Afrocentric. And so one of the things I made sure on the church project was to have this gold pyramid that was made out of copper on top of the roof. And we had a fountain that went down the site like it was the Nile River. So you really have to take your client's vision and really try to create that on paper, but also create that in the built environment. Yes, idiosyncratic, cultural and political climates. There is no way in the world that you can go to Africa and think that you're going to be doing business like you do business here in the United States. No way. I've had colleagues who think that you're supposed to put a square in a round hole. It just won't work. You will be twisting and turning the whole time. You have to learn and understand the language, and I'm not meaning French or Swahili. You have to understand their colloquials, how to interact. For instance, I had to learn that most times I would be having dinner late at night. because most of the key stakeholders that I would meet with work during the day, and they are politicians, and they don't have time really to meet with you. And so you end up having dinner late at night or in the middle of the night. It just depends on the situation. I went, my first trip, I thought I overpacked, and was concerned about, you know, luggage and having too much clothing. And I found out I was sorely wrong. My people, my African brothers and sisters, they enjoy entertaining, they enjoy doing things. I went through my clothes like it was nothing. I did not overpack. Also, you need to respect and understand their rituals and their customs, and understand the relationships. They're very formal. I have never been in a place, of course, outside of America that was so formal and so congenial, other than Louisiana. That's where I'm from. Other than Louisiana. So I do say that you have to try to understand the political environment there. Reading about it here or seeing it on the television is not going to cut it. You have to get your feet there. You have to get on the ground. You've got to have someone there who is going to be your cheerleader, who can promote you, who can do those things that you can't do when you're not there on the ground, but really, more importantly, help you to understand that culture and environment. Wow, I don't know what happened to this PowerPoint, but it's acting up here. So, getting back to that, you have to adapt. You have to understand and go with the flow. You have to have a personality, a great personality. You have to have the right attitude. You can't go in there thinking that, oh, I'm from the West, our way is the best way or the right way. That's not true. You have to understand the construction methods and materials there. What may work there may not work here, and vice versa. And also be authentic. I happen to have grown up in a small town in Louisiana. My grandparents were farmers. And so being, especially when I went to Nigeria the first time, it was like being in rural Louisiana. I really hated to come back to the States. The pace of life in Abuja was so much slower than here. And this is in Ghana. Just really exploring and understanding the culture, the people. You have to put yourself there. And if you're not a people person, you really should not try to do business in Africa. Collaboration. Now, that is something I think that can make or break a project. You have to be skilled in knowing how to put together a team, because some personalities may crash, or not going to work out sometimes when you have a room full of type A personality types. Sometimes that is not the best way to handle a situation or put these people together in a room. But even so, understanding the attitudes and the relationships among different people should give you some indication of who you should bring together in a room and who you should collaborate with as a team. But once you do get that component of it done, then you all should come together and decide on a project and how you define that project, what the needs are, and you specifically come up with a project definition. So that means your stakeholder from one community may want something in healthcare, or say the roads, or they need more women's medical care. Whatever that is, you need to come together and you all define that project. And then even at that time, if you have people that are on the ground that are going to be a part of your project team, at that time you should also talk about the way that this is going to be structured. Who is going to lead who? What type of contract arrangements are you going to have? And I'll go ahead and say it, because we all know that when you know people on a lower level, you got to pay to get up to the high level. And when I say that, it's not derogatory. It's just you need to figure out who that one person is that is going to work for you and is going to get you to the right people at the right time in the right places. And then once you have all that kind of figured out, and it takes some time to get that figured out, then you partner and you come up with your total quality management plan. Because collaboration is very, very important, and you cannot underestimate that component of a project. Fortunately, I have been able to have business development contracts with a few people who are from the continent or on the continent, and have been able to finagle my way to Ghana, Nigeria, and now Kenya. And it has been challenging at times, but it's very well worth it because I see the need and the need to help women and children, especially in healthcare and education. In fact, that particular meeting that I was having was actually here in Houston, and that was a governor, and that particular meeting was actually done around midnight. So it tells you that you really have to really want to do this to be in the game. Funding. And everybody knows that funding is a soul of a project. And how do you get funding? Well, I tell you, it's not easy. I've worked 6 years trying to get funding. And finally, the last 3-4 years, I have come into the right, circles, per se. I know some people like to go the traditional financing route, meaning the World Bank, the IMF, the MCC. That's just not who I am. I figured if I have cultivated relationships on the continent and gain the trust of my colleagues, why would I need to go to the World Bank and have them to tell me, which they have told me, you need to get with the IBMs or the blue chip companies of the world and be a subcontractor, like I've been for years, done all the work for years, led the team for years. So I decided to think out of the box and find my own funding. Funding is out there. It's there, and you have to be creative about your funding sources. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to go through government to get your funding. And I don't want to go too far into the funding component, in particularly because my funding is through private placement or private investors. But it's there. I mean, the funding is out there, and it may not be in the United States. It may be in Europe. It may be in Asia. It may be in the Middle East, but it is there. But the one thing, though, you can do if you don't have the connections or the circles that you're running in, if you don't have that funding component, you can do a public-private partnership or a build, operate, and transfer agreement. And that, for me, works best. The build, operate, and transfer agreement, where you build it, you design, you build it, you operate it for a certain period of time, and then you transfer it back over to them free and clear of all encumbrances. That way you have control over the entire development. You can get your private funding, and my funders are happy with the way that I have brought a package to them and put the controls and the processes in place. And so if there's any negativity when it comes to, oh, this work is in Africa, then they see that I'm responsible. The buck stops with me. And then it helps too if the country or government entity has projects that are guaranteed with the sovereign guarantee, because that will give you leverage in order to go and get some funding. So that's key. But what I found, though, a lot of times countries or entities, especially state governments, they have allocated that money for projects for a number of years. So it's difficult for them to tie up funds for a period of time. So that gets back to just thinking out of the box and coming up with some creative financing for your project. Okay, so once you've gotten your people together, you've defined the project, you have your collaborative team in place, then you have to come up with a proposal that's all-inclusive and is bulletproof. And when I say bulletproof, you gotta think of everything that there is to make sure that you are not gonna lose your socks, for one thing, and also that you're gonna deliver what they have asked of you. You have to think of every scenario. What if there's a war breaks out or a tsunami comes? Whatever that disaster is, you need to have things in place. Like, I always make sure, and I tell my clients, I will get political risk insurance along with my professional liability insurance. If something should happen to me, that project will still be viable, it will still move forward. So make sure that you have all scenarios into this contract. Let's see, your management plan and your final analysis or final assessments. After you have this contract, you still need to go back over what you submitted before. You make sure that you have that management plan in place and that everyone understands who's in charge. Because the one thing you don't want is to get there and there's some discrepancy about who is going to lead and do what. Also, the establishing reporting and your controls. That is key on this side of the water and also over there. My business model is that we create here and we construct and hire the local construction firm there. My construction managers go there to oversee that firm, and we come together as a team. So I'm creating jobs here in the States, and then I'm creating jobs there. But also you have to take in consideration training and development on the continent. Okay, but I forgot to tell you about this, and this is kind of like a trade secret. I wanted to tell you more about the proposal. This is just a table of contents for one of my proposals that I put in, and it's not in the packet. But I wanted to show you how you have to be very detailed about when you're putting a proposal. This isn't the MOU or the BOT contract, but just the proposal, to make sure that they understand you know what you're doing, and also that you're not leaving any stone unturned. Any construction plan or staffing plan, I always include what am I going to do in the first 30 days? What am I doing in the first 90 days or the first 180 days? Once you've gotten this MOU signed and you've gotten your funding done, the very next thing you need to do is engage with that community, because the last thing you want to do is for rumors to get out. You don't want to shoot yourself in the foot before you get there. So you engage the community, and you also include professionals there that are on the ground. One of the things that I've required my engineering firms or architecture firms to do is to make sure that they partner with firms there, firms that are already there on the ground, so that they can be a part of this process as well. And then make sure that the community knows what the benefits are, what's in it for them, not just for you, but what's in it for them as a whole. So you have to build this consensus and get their support. And transparency is key. And when I say that, how can you be transparent? Because you have the BOT. You're the one who is driving this thing. Well, you can do this. You can put a camera out on that site, on the construction site. You can have a website that is dedicated totally for that project. So anyone who's there on the continent or here in America or Mexico or Canada can tap in and see what's exactly happening with that particular project. And it's open. You have nothing to hide. Training and development. There is no way I can go to Africa and not train. And although there's a number of people who are already skilled in these areas, you still need to make sure that your team, and your team is going to include local people, that everyone is on the same page. So you have to come up with some type of apprenticeship program, whether it be for electricians, whether it be for plumbers. It has to be something all-inclusive from engineering and architecture, from construction managers, to even the office support. So it is very important that you include training and development in your proposal. And it does two things. It helps you with people resources, but also it helps them for when you're gone. For instance, you build a facility. Now, if they don't know or understand how to run a computer-aided facilities management program, you just built a facility that's going to die in a few years. You have to maintain and know how to operate that facility. So what you do is you train and you develop personnel who will be on the ground after you're long gone to be able to maintain and operate that facility. Okay, corporate and social responsibility. That's one that should just come with the territory. And it's not something that's just out of the box. Something as simple as meeting with your stakeholders and finding out what their needs are on a local and on a personal level. For instance, my client in Kenya, in one county, Nyeri County, they have a problem with their growers, their coffee and their tea growers, who are in essence sharecropping, because during a certain time of the year, they're having to sell their crops for pennies on the dollar. And the brokers are able to purchase it up in bulk, and so they don't have a choice but to sell during, say, August, September, when school starts, and they know that these growers need to have money for school tuition and books. So what the government and we've come up with a coffee stabilization fund, where we put monies into this fund, and when the growers, or when the coffee's gone out to market, if the buyer has a purchase order and they are needing to fulfill that order, but they're not going to be paid for another 30 or 60 days, then this particular fund will pay the farmer, and when their invoice or when their monies come in, then that monies will go back into this fund. So what it does, it stabilizes the market and it makes it equal, where the broker cannot no longer just pay them pennies on the dollar. And I say at this point, it is making them sharecroppers, because a lot of times some of the farmers have to borrow against the next year's crop. So you're behind. So anyway, so we've come up with this coffee stabilization fund that will help with training, leasing, not leasing, but purchasing of equipment, and also stabilizing the market by giving them their remittances. Okay, let's see here. So when you do that, though, you're not only getting the work yourself and feeling good about the development, you really are helping people to a point where they can help themselves. Africans always say, we want trade, not aid. So when you go in and even doing a development, you really have to think outside of the box and come up with ideas that are not like being here in the United States. And I just wanted to say this. You can never give anything away. When you sow and when you give something to somebody, it's going to always come back to you. So in essence, you can never give it away. My client, for 4 years, I worked on the hospital. Oh God, I can't believe I'm getting emotional too. I worked in the hospital for free for 4 years. all the work, all the architectural, the preliminary work. And finally, in this particular client that I had wanted to do a private hospital, and they could never get their funding together. And they didn't want me to get the funding for them. They wanted to utilize their own sources, and I kept trying to tell them I have a funding source for them. But I went on because they were my client, and this was a client that was a private client. It wasn't a government entity. And I worked with them for 4 years, and I put my heart and soul in it, and finally, they went away. I mean, I've had other clients, but this particular hospital, I felt I believed in, because there are only so many level 1 hospitals. When I say level 1, like a level 1 U.S. hospital, 600-bed hospital, that's a training hospital, that has dormitories, that's a campus. I met this governor from Kenya just on a whim. And lo and behold, he was looking for someone who could help with building a hospital. And so all the work that I'd done for free was not in vain. And so that's why I say you can never give anything away, because it does come back to you. And so I'll leave you with this. For in him we live, and we move, and we have our being. So if you're going to do work on the continent, you really have to be in tune with who you are and why God created you. That's all.
Associate Professor of Wim S.V. Tubman University in the Republic of Liberia. She's going to discuss the African diaspora and development. And she has been here for the past couple of months. I think she came during the African Leaders Summit, and because of the Ebola incident there, she has been unable to go back. And I have volunteered to go. So please welcome Dr.
Thank you. Before I get into my formal presentation, I have to say my hat's off to Gina Bradford, because she's the first African American woman that I have met who has done all of these wonderful things, and I've always said I truly admire architects anyway, so let's give her another hand. The points that she made are relevant whether you're talking about construction or even other projects. And I just say this, you know, a lot of people talk about what the Chinese are doing in Africa. The university that I'm with in Liberia, we're in the southeast part. We're one of only 2 public institutions of higher learning in Liberia. The others are private. The other university in Liberia had on one of its other campuses, dormitories built by the Chinese to show the significance of being culturally relevant and sensitive. Those dormitories are standing empty, even though there's a dire need for facilities. They're standing empty because they were built with the toilets on the outside, and the Liberian students resent that and are not using the facilities. So you can't emphasize too much the importance of being culturally relevant, culturally sensitive to where one is. And another thing, she's a model, because one of the projects that we did with students, architectural students from Howard, Tuskegee, and Morgan, they came to Liberia in March and are designing a building for us. And one of the students in that project, so you never know how you touch lives, said he was about to drop out of architecture because he thought all he could see was that he would get to draft. And because of that project, he now feels, well, maybe I can design for Africa. So it's not, this whole process is not a one-way where we're giving to those people. But we both are those people. We are all those people, and we both stand to benefit. So just want to keep, that's my little soap opera. Now I'll start my official presentation. Now, according to, well, first of all, members of the diplomatic corps, government, excellencies, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, good afternoon. My name is Barbara Simmons, and it's an honor for me to come before you today to have the opportunity to just share some of my views and ideas. One correction, I do not have a PhD, I have a Juris Doctorate, a JD. So, first of all, I want to thank Jeanette for all of the hard work that she did in pulling this together and her patience with all of us in making this happen. And of course, I also want to acknowledge Mel Foote for his unwavering dedication and stamina in working for the good of us all. Now, in my presentation, I entitled it Diasporan Involvement in Africa, to be or not to be. Now, I will explore the origin and definitions of diaspora, the viability of the notion of the African diaspora being actively involved in Africa, and whether all persons of African descent should be involved in Africa. What are some of the obstacles to that involvement, options for involvement, and suggestions for going forward? Now, first, in terms of the origin of the term, according to what's called vocabulary.com, a diaspora is a large group of people with a similar heritage or homeland who have since moved out to places all over the world. Now, the ancient Greek word diaspora, meaning to disperse or scatter about, it mentions the diaspora of Jews exiled from Israel by the Babylonians. I was struck by the number as I viewed several sources that I consulted, that the number of times there was a reference made to ancient Israel in the explanations. Israel is seen as a primary example of diasporans. 2 weeks ago, I attended a launching of a UN program involving entrepreneurship and the diaspora. And at that session, the first presenter was an Israeli woman. This brings me to my next point of exploration, the viability of the African diaspora, whether or not we should be actively involved. But let me say that the definition of diaspora that I prefer is the one that comes from Merriam-Webster, which states, a group of people who live outside the area in which they have lived for a long time or in which their ancestors lived. So this would be the definition that I'm using as I speak. A slight digression. One of the subjects I've always loved to teach is sociology. And for the record, the concept of race is a social construct. Humans created that idea. It is not a scientific phenomenon. When I've asked students in the past to name, well, who are the pure races after studying this subject, they had to admit there are none. Furthermore, if we are to believe scientist Dr. Leakey's finding that the oldest form of humans was located in Africa, and this person he called Lucy, also referred to as Eve, Eve would be the mother of all of us wherever we are on the planet. So therefore, we all would be of African descent. But sometimes even those of us who are commonly identified as of African descent, we question that. So whether it's viable for the African diaspora to be involved in Africa depends on seeing itself as African. When people want to use the Jewish people as an example to follow, I question that because I know of no significant number of people of Jewish descent who question their Jewishness. As you know, some of us do not identify with Africa, and some Africans do not identify us as being a part of them. But I think back to El-Hajj Malik Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X, who used to say, If a cat has its babies in the oven, you don't call it a biscuit. So again, if we're defining diaspora as those who have either once lived on the continent and moved, or those who are the descendants, then let it be known, I'm a member of the first African diasporans as a descendant of formerly enslaved Africans. Now, for those of us who are clear on who we are, there are real opportunities for us to be actively involved in Africa, as you've heard from many of our speakers. But in terms of exploring whether all persons of African descent should be involved with Africa, that's an easy one for me. The answer is no. Not all persons of the African diaspora should be involved because, in my opinion, those whose self-hatred is so ingrained that their involvement would only spread ill will, or if their only goal would be the exploitation of Africa, we'd be better off without their involvement. And as you can see from Gina, when there is that love and commitment to Africa, there's nothing that could be compared to that. So my contention would be the rest of us who are not self-hating, we should be involved. Now, those before me have talked about some of the potential benefits, but what about some of the obstacles? Recently, I met African journalists who used the term complexicated. I told them that I would use that term in relationship to us. Our situation is both complex and it's complicated. I wholeheartedly support involvement in Africa, and I have literally put my body where my mouth was in terms of living in Liberia, although I won't be returning for a little while. Realistically, we need to strategize, and that's why I had asked Gina to leave on the PowerPoint the outline that she had in terms of assessing a situation, because I believe that's what we need to do even in relationship to how do we go forward as a diaspora. Those that think we need to be involved, we need to be strategic about it. Having goodwill is not enough. We've got to assess what the issues are, decide how the problem would be solved, look at what are the resources, both human and capital, that we need to go forward, and then develop our plan and execute it. That's another thing. We are very good at being in the oral tradition. We've got to document, and then we've got to execute. Now, another issue that we have to address. We can't assume that all those on the continent will be welcome us with open arms. I admit that the first African country that I went to, I was greeted with welcome arms. Literally, as I walked down the street, there were people saying, "Welcome home, sister." I've been elsewhere where there were no open arms, and in fact, to put it mildly, it was like I was an intruder. I recall sitting in a church in Africa where the pastor announced there will be some from the diaspora coming for a reunion, and I heard someone say, "What are they coming for?" So there's preparation that needs to be done on both sides. And I think regarding some options for involvement, one, of course, is to do what I did to move to Africa, but that's not necessary for everyone. And of course, the majority will not move to Africa, but we all can contribute in some way. I remember hearing, for those of you here who are familiar with Gil Scott-Heron, him saying, "No one can do everything, but everyone can do something. And if everyone does what he or she can do, all that needs to be done will be addressed." So I believe that as we strategize, we can come to look at what are some of the things we need to do. And one that was mentioned, we need to regularly communicate with each other, learn from each other, and then work jointly on initiatives. In closing, Africa has a lot to offer us, and we have a lot to offer it. This is not a one-way street. Others know Africa has a lot to offer. Trust me, Ebola is not going to stop others from getting involved in Africa. If anything, others are looking at how they are going to capitalize on the crisis. We can do this, that is, be blessed blessings to Africa. We need to create that master plan, and though our situation is complexicated, God has given us all that we need to do to go forward. Are we willing to practice Kujichagulia, which is a principle of Kwanzaa, which Ms. Bradford is an example of? Are we going to practice self-determination, or are we going to allow other people to determine for us whether or not we go forward? If we practice Kujichagulia, we can go forward. I believe it's a situation where we don't have to. We do not have to get involved or increase our involvement in Africa, but I would contend that it will be woe unto us. Just as Mordecai said to Esther when he had gone to her requesting her support for the Jewish people, think not that if you choose not to come to your, I'm paraphrasing, to come to your people's aid, that God will not come to their aid, but you and your house will not be taken care of. So I believe we've been called for such a time as this. So I leave you with this question. Diaspora involvement in Africa, to be or not to be? Thank you. Should I make this announcement now? A workshop that will be part of the constituency for Africa, and there are flyers. I have some in there on the table. It will be this coming Thursday at the Microsoft Innovation and Policy Center. It is entitled African and African American Universities, the Diaspora and Stakeholders, plus Science, Engineering, Technology, and Mathematics, Equal Formula for Success. You all are welcome, and please spread the word. It's free, but please do register. There will be a reception following it, and again, I thank you.
Malika Walton from CUSO International. And she's going to really combine, as you look, if you look on your agenda, she's going to combine her two presentations. One is on capacity building for African diaspora organizations, and the other is the role of skilled volunteers in capacity building of organizations in countries of origin.
In international development perspective about the ways that we get African diaspora particularly involved in the continent. For those who might not be investing in business but want to give either from both on the continent through their skills and also on getting engaged here locally to then contribute. So I'm going to kind of be touching on it from the very practical experience of CUSO International. I'm going to talk about our engagement as a whole with diaspora communities, and I also want to talk about some stories, a few stories. We've heard some great stories today from people who've been involved, so I'll touch on a couple more stories about skilled volunteers, and I'm going to discuss also the challenges. Some of them have been raised, but sometimes with volunteers who aren't investors, there's some other challenges that they face, so I'll be covering all of those. I think the important thing that I want to get across is that diaspora want to contribute to Africa, and that they don't necessarily want to live there, and so we're creating other opportunities within the international development context. And I don't say don't want to live there, but for other reasons. You've got a spouse who doesn't want to move, you've got kids who you're really trying to educate. So there's a lot of reasons why you might not want to move to another continent, whether it's Africa or Europe, but you still want to be involved in that community, in your community. What I'm going to say is not meant to be conclusive by any means about how diaspora can be engaged, or it's not scientific work yet on diaspora engagement and volunteerism, but I'm giving you some stories, examples, and then we can engage further in discussion about how to make volunteerism in particular for Africa, how to strengthen the ability to engage in volunteerism. There we go. Oh, all right. Can you put it back for me? Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. And I'm going to put on my glasses now to help me read through this. Okay, this is what's going to take me to the next one? Okay. Let me give you a little bit of background about CUSO International. We're a Canadian international development organization, Canadian-based, rather, and I am in the Washington office. I am American, working for a Canadian organization, so I've got my own kind of cultural dynamics going on because we are very different people. It's the same age as the Peace Corps, so it's formed in the same year. On your program, you'll see it says the Canadian University Students Organization. That is our old name. So if you have a minute, just write it off. It is now CUSO International, but it did start with the same kind of purpose as mobilizing university students to do international development overseas, very similar to what the Peace Corps started as. But now we focus on skilled development, volunteerism. So the average age of our volunteer is 40 and generally a mid-career professional with specific skills in their area of expertise for which they are then deployed or working in a development project. So we're now a little bit different from other volunteer organizations, is that we really are looking for skilled professionals. And then the focus of what we do is capacity building. So not necessarily doing the work, but helping those who are doing the work locally, which is local partners, local NGOs. We're helping them to strengthen skills in an identified need. So we hope, to the most part, you can never be sure in a development context that we're going in and that we're saying, you're our partner now, what's the work that you're doing, where do you see a gap, and how can we come find the skills in North America to assist you for a 3-month period, for a 1-year period, for a 2-year period. And that's the work that we're trying to do, is not to do the work of local and nonprofits or local governments, but to help them build their capacity. That's a little bit about CUSO International, and our focus really is our theory of change, this has been talked about, is that change happens from that individual engagement. So the person-to-person engagement, whether you're engaging with just one person, your counterpart, or a group of people, that change can really happen when individuals connect. We have a history in CUSO International of recruiting diaspora for development projects. It's about a 6-year history of really in-depth focus on diaspora, primarily in North America. In Canada. But then we've moved to the United States about 3 years ago and engaged in this project, Diasporas for Development, with USAID and Accenture, which was really focused on engaging the diaspora in the U.S. to be able to go overseas. To Africa. Well, we had 5 countries, so it included 2 African countries. But it's that issue of brain drain that we were trying to address, of the need for human resources and capacity that are in the U.S., that are in the diaspora in the U.S., and how to help move people overseas who, again, might not have the wherewithal to do it themselves. We had two major approaches to this, which was the capacity building for diaspora organizations in the U.S., and then also recruiting 100 American professionals from diaspora communities to share their skills. Our 5 target countries, Jamaica, the Philippines, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Peru. So as you can see, 2 of them were in sub-Saharan Africa. We had 4 major objectives. As I mentioned, increasing the capacity of diaspora partner organizations, primarily, and I'll talk about this a little bit towards the end, through the strategic planning process that they engaged in with Accenture. And then as they were strengthened to help see how we, QSO International, could engage with them so that they could strengthen linkages, all of them that we ended up selecting had programmatic activities and some back home, and how we could continue to strengthen their work. We sent, or sending, in the process of sending 40 skilled volunteers to placements. And of that, whoops, the paper's going to blow. We had, oh, I don't have the exact numbers. We had about 12 in Ethiopia, 8 to Kenya, I believe, of the 40. We are still recruiting for one more volunteer to go to Ethiopia. So if you know anybody who is interested after we talk through this about skilled volunteerism, please come see me. I can provide some information. And we have our website as well, qsointernational.org. And then we also were engaging in an e-mentoring program, or e-volunteering program, where, so that 100 that I mentioned, 40 overseas, and the additional 60 would continue, either continue the work of a volunteer who went overseas, or we'd identify other projects where they could continue to engage virtually, again, with local NGOs and capacity building. So that's kind of what we did. Okay, so here's the high-level developmental speak about the impact, and then I actually really want to talk about a couple stories. But it does show you that as we're a development organization, we have to talk about what the impact of our work is. But even with the diaspora aspect kind of aside, we, through our 40 projects that we've been engaged in, as you can see, 2,000 people were directly impacted by the work that our volunteers were doing. And I think most significantly are some of those smaller ones that over time, as the projects continued, we've been able to see 32 people, for example, getting internships, 62 people being able to start a business after the engagement of our volunteers, and that's across the scope. But what I really wanted to talk about was a little bit about what that looks like and the stories of our volunteers. And that is that so one example is a woman who actually is an employee of Accenture and is an IT specialist, and she was in Ethiopia. And she was working with an organization called Live Addis, and found that when she got there, although she had a scope of work, it changed. It almost always does in volunteerism for some reason. And then she ended up networking their office. So they had computers, but they weren't connected to the telecommunications network. And because she had the experience back here as an IT professional, she was able to go in and look at the system that they had and help them to develop a system of networking their office, and then had the knowledge and the skills to actually communicate with the telecommunications officials locally, which took a lot of time. But because she was there in a capacity to assist them, she was able to develop the network for that whole office, which then improves the capacity of that office to engage with its constituency in Addis Ababa. Another example was a woman who was in Kenya, and she was in Mombasa, and she's from the region of Mombasa. She left when she was in high school age, and she was working for a very small woman-centric NGO, and she was there with some other volunteers who were non-diaspora, and they quickly realized when they were there that the executive director, for a whole bunch of complicated reasons that many of you might be familiar with in the African development context, that the director was not fully engaged, but also sometimes the employees were not getting paid and they weren't sure where the money was. And the young women would keep working because the young women who were in the office not getting paid would keep working because they didn't want to lose their job because there weren't other opportunities and they'd eventually get paid. But and they didn't really understand that they might have a recourse. So through her dialogue and encouragement with them, they eventually went to the board for that NGO. The board was not aware of the problems, and the board listened to them and then made changes within the financial structure of the organization. That is not why she was there, but that is an example I'm giving of the impact that she had on a person-to-person level, so that changes were made within the organization and the young women could continue to get paid. The other example that she had given was going out and talking with the community, and one of the goals of the organization she was with was to promote education for girls. She said she was really able to engage in a conversation with the fathers, for example, of why don't you want to educate your daughters? They would say we want them to get married because they get the dowry. And because she was from the region, could talk about how her parents had actually put education ahead of money. And then additionally, she was able to explain to them in a monetary standpoint, from a monetary perspective, if you let your girls get educated, see how much more money they can give you back than if you get the dowry this year and it's only going to last you a year. So she said she had that ability to talk about it on a very local experiential level and give the example of herself, which somebody else from the diaspora who was not of the diaspora background would not have that same experience. So she found that the value of her being diaspora going back was that of really being able to be an example. That works both ways, and hopefully I'll have a chance to mention that at some other point. Another example that really touched me that I heard of last week was a woman who went to a deaf school in Ethiopia. And she is and I'll take a second to explain, when we talk about diaspora within this project, we have the broad definition of diaspora. Extremely broad in the sense that we are funded by USAID, so we can't discriminate for anybody. So if you happen to apply and you have the right qualifications, we are obligated to look at that application and accept you. So you don't have to be of any strict definition of diaspora except have an affinity for the region. And so I'll talk about her in that context. So she does say that, I think somewhere back in her family heritage there was some Ethiopian, but she's also married to somebody who's Ethiopian. He was not the volunteer, though. She was the volunteer. But her spouse decided to go with her to the deaf school as an Ethiopian. And he previously didn't have much interest in engaging in his country. But because he went on this experience with her, he's now still there. She's back in the U.S., and his specialty is cooking, and he did do some cooking, but then he came up with the idea of teaching the deaf students how to play soccer, which nobody had really thought that was possible, but because he'd played on the soccer team for Ethiopia before, and because he had that experience of playing soccer, he learned how to sign and learned how to teach the kids at that school how to play soccer. They formed a team, they got t-shirts, they're competing, and he is now fully engaged again in his country because of the experience of his spouse. So there's different stories that come out when you start to create opportunities for the people of the diaspora to go back home, opportunities they may not have thought of themselves. So there are challenges, particularly for our volunteers. We had a lot of conversation this morning about investment in Africa. And one of the things that our volunteers tell us who are from the diaspora is that volunteerism has different levels of respect depending upon which African country that you're engaged in. There's some countries where there's a very strong engagement of the community in volunteerism. There's other places where they don't use the word, but people do the actions. And then there's some places where volunteerism is not part of the societal infrastructure. So when we just call somebody a diaspora volunteer, it has a certain connotation. In particular, within the conversation we had today and a lot in the conversations in African countries, diaspora are investors. And so a volunteer going to give their time and their skills and their talents are expected to also come with money. And our volunteers, a lot of them are, as I said, mid-career professionals, not extremely wealthy, maybe a little bit more wealthy from that context, but they're not there to invest $20 million or $10 million or even, a couple $1,000s. They're really there to give their skill and talent. So it becomes a psychological, social challenge on them to continue to struggle with that expectation. And that the other thing I wanted to talk about, the communication styles, the country dynamics, is that, and so a couple people have mentioned that. I know Ms. Bradford mentioned this about doing business differently. There's a communication style. I think many of our volunteers have found that even if they grew up in Ethiopia or Kenya and have been gone for 20 years, they've become a little bit more American in their communication style than they realized. So, for example, a woman from Ethiopia was talking with us last week, and she was trying to be very positive in explaining to the colleagues she was working with in an NGO the importance of washing your hands, and how that's really important not to spread disease or sickness and illness. And unfortunately, maybe didn't moderate the way she communicated for the audience, and then was immediately accused of trying to be better than them and not appreciating their culture and their ways. And she reflected on that and said it probably because I was communicating as I would to a group in the US. I was not, and it was her moment to realize that she had changed, and she needed to figure out how to better communicate with her community, but in a way that was not hurtful, and that was proactive. So those are some of the challenges, and I think everybody in this room here, or many of you in this room who are of the diaspora and have gone back, have found that you do change culturally. And so we work on that in CUSO to try and prepare people for that. But I will say that there's probably nothing like actually experiencing it yourself to really have that ingrained. And people have talked already a lot about the earning capacity and the distortion of earning capacity, where people don't realize the cost of living in the United States compared to how much I'm earning and the expectations from a monetary perspective. I want to move on a little bit to talk about our diaspora organizations. So as I said, we partnered with diaspora organizations in the US. These are the 5 organizations that we worked with, and for Africa, it was particularly the Society of Ethiopians Established in the Diaspora, SEED, and for Kenya, Startup Africa. We selected these organizations through a kind of a long process of both researching what organizations were here in the US, and then there were some things that had to be fulfilled. You had to be a registered, active registration nonprofit, so 501(c) status, 3C status had to be up to date. Nonpartisan, non-political, non-religious, all of that, and have a positive relationship with the U.S. government and with the government in the host country, Kenya or Ethiopia in this manner, partially because it was USAID funded, so there were some specific criteria that we were looking at. And then all of these organizations have some sort of programming that is engaged or in their home country as well. What these organizations went through is a capacity building process that was mainly Accenture in the lead position for doing an Accenture Federal Services that does nonprofit strategy exercises with nonprofits in the US. And they went through a very similar exercise with these 5 organizations. And I use these slides particular because this is Accenture copyrighted information, so that's why I've used the specific information down there at the bottom. This just gives you an idea of a strategic planning process that for any organization, but this was slightly adapted for the Diaspora for Development initiative. Where the organizations are now, it's been a 2-year process. Well, let's see, one organization's about a year has finished its actual strategy process, so about a year and a half. We're in the monitor, evaluate, and report stage with all of these organizations, but some of them finished a year ago, some of them finished 6 months ago, so they're at different stages in implementing their strategic plan. This gives you a sort of idea of what Accenture gave to them, which was a strategic plan for 3 to 5 years, recommendations in terms of board and organization, and some ideas about fundraising and some ideas about how to decide what you're going to do for programming. The reason I highlight this is I'm going to go to the next stage and really talk about these diaspora organizations and what we found in terms of their development. So what Accenture found, having had a lot of experience with NGO strategic planning, was that for diaspora organizations in the United States, there's nothing quite like it. There's not a model in NGOs in the US that they could fit the diaspora organizations into. And that is largely because where we found the organizations, even though some of them were 20 years old, SEED has, I think, 20 plus years of experience, is that they were still largely volunteer driven and then driven by the passion and drive of volunteers. And a lot of times in the United States, you'll find organizations that are 20 years old have graduated to another level with a firm office and some firm foundation of staff and core funding, at least from some grant perspective, or a very large, well-defined fundraising effort from individuals. So they were finding that the diaspora organizations were not quite in that same that same zone, no matter how old they were. And they also were finding that the organizations with a passion, they were still, again, because they were volunteer-based, they were usually coordinated by 1 or 2 individuals. So that part that I mentioned previously, the board structure, the organization structure, recommendation, a lot of that was about how do you engage the broader part of your constituency, which they did have. How do you formalize how you're going to engage them moving forward to grow your organization and make sure you're fulfilling their impact. The other thing was the strategic plan, they really focused a lot of time on the mission and vision statement so that these organizations could really define what is it that we want to do. And then they provided them a tool to say, okay, if somebody comes and asks you tomorrow, can you do this? Can you help us with this? How are you going to decide whether you can or you can't based on your mission and vision? So they spent a lot of time helping the organizations really engage in that discussion. And before I get into my last point there about the fundraising options, no, my train of thought just lost. So I'll just go that. The other thing with the organizations that we're still going to be talking about more, and I'll be talking about, we were mentioned on the Calvert slide, we'll be talking about Calvert, is that it appears that in the United States there is a lot of grant money that is out there and available, and how you get access to it as a community organization is not as well known to diaspora organizations, and how those diaspora organizations start to develop the networks so that they can, and the networks and the capacity. Mr. Kasonga mentioned hiring a grant writer, but you also mentioned that it's expensive and costs money. But getting into those networks and understanding how to do that is where we are, I think, with most of the diaspora partner organizations of CUSO International now is we have to take that to the next step. Some are farther along than others. The thing I wanted to mention was time. When you engage in a strategic planning process, it takes a lot of time. A member of our organization, the executive director for Gawa Kalinga USA, will say they thought it was going to be a weekend. It took them 6 months. What it did mean to them is that some of their programming stopped a little bit as they took the time, because they were volunteers. They were meeting 12 o'clock at night, not as late, but 8 to 10 at night, teleconferences, and just a lot of in-depth thinking. Who are we? Your whole meeting spent on a sentence in the mission plan, 2-hour meeting spent on one sentence. But what it did do was it provided them that opportunity to focus their time and to really figure out how they wanted to move forward. So not perfect because they do need to step back, but hopefully benefits for the long term. And then the opportunity for other members to engage, really making sure that they were creating opportunities for their membership and their volunteers to engage. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. And again, as I said, I wanted to provide you with a practitioner's perspective of how we're really trying to engage diaspora. I've left some information outside on CUSO International. One of them is a flyer for an event that we're having on October 16th about engagement of diaspora in development. We'll be talking more in depth and have more, we'll have some volunteers actually talking about their experiences, but also people from State Department and USAID and academics who are talking about these issues. And that's on October 16th during Global Diaspora Week. So there's a flyer out there. Thank you very much for your attention.
What is about?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And I also want to thank Janet Legoul and Mel for the wonderful job they're doing and the magnificent presentations that we have heard. Well, first of all, the Falou Foundation is an organization that we started 26 years ago. But we first focus on training women, and specifically minority women, both African descendants and Latino women in the area of New York. The training went on through computers. Mostly we spearheaded what is called the Silicon Barrio, to introduce children from 3-year-old to computer applications and introduce our communities to the advantages of following computer and technology, because we knew that those developments are going to be guiding the creation of wealth, the creation of jobs, the creation of businesses. But then we confronted a situation that is being confronted in almost all countries of the world, which is not enough jobs, unemployment. We find a situation right now of unemployment all throughout, including Europe. In Spain, it's 27% unemployment. Greece, Africa, 12% in Ghana, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, and in United States specifically, we confront that reality. So then we switch, instead of training for jobs, we switch to creating jobs. And that's the stage where we find ourselves in the present. And to start with, the definition of diaspora we focus is the definition adopted by the African Union, because I participated in the deliberation for 1 year while the African Union was determining what is the definition we're going to use of diaspora. And actually, when we in the task team of the African Union for Diaspora delivered for more than a month, we identified 4 groups, which are African American, descendants of former enslaved, then African continentals, which has been assessed as 2 million people, but then we have a new group coming up, Afro-Latinos. And I say new group, they were always in existence, but they didn't know or didn't realize or didn't want to accept that they were African descendants. So in that sense, they are new because the realization that they are African descendants has come with all kinds of energies, and there is a revolution going on throughout Central, South, and Latin America, where you find in every country developments that you don't even find in the United States. For example, in Colombia, since 1990, it's a requirement for all people, not only the blacks, to learn about the Afro-Colombian heritage as a requirement from first grade all the way to college. That's in Colombia. In Argentina, how many of you didn't know that there are blacks in Argentina? Well, there are. Many of them, they didn't even know it. It's already a law required to study Afro-Argentinian history from first grade all the way to university. And of course in Brazil, where we have over 190 million population, and half of the population, over 90 million, are Afro-descendant. And of course, you and I know that that's underestimated because we have the problem in the Latino communities of people who don't identify themselves as Afro-descendant, even they might be blacker than me or many of you. But that's a problem. Why we need to talk openly about this problem? Because it's a big problem of identity. And it's a problem that has created many problems in our communities and tragedies in many families. But the fact that this revolution is taking place at all levels is bringing the discussion to the families, to the schools, to the universities, unite us in identifying what has impeded our development. And if you go to black communities throughout the world, in United States, Latin America, Central America, and even in Africa, you find that much of the impediment that didn't make possible the development of the community has to do with the lack of accepting that we have all capabilities, like all human beings, not only to take charge of the responsibility, but to be in charge, which is a concept that takes time to develop, because the fact that you accept a position of being the head and the responsibility of indicating path and development and objective and work for it, sometimes it's decades and decades, and in some cases it never happened. And most of the explanation of our children preparedness to complete schooling has to do with that lack of self-confidence that they can achieve, because in their families they never were exposed to that sense of self-realization and self-empowerment and self-definition. So we're kind of fighting two struggles simultaneously. The struggle to work with our capabilities, to be owners of our own destiny and self-determination, and the struggle to do the action that is necessary to achieve that development that permit our families and children to enjoy the opportunities of higher standard of living that has been available for all groups throughout. So in that sense, we accepted that definition, but of course has been working more closely with Latino African descendants because of the facility of the bilingual skills that we have. And one of the things first that I did was translate to Spanish 4 books on African history to Spanish. And you might say, well, what does that got to do with development? I think that to develop, we first have to know who we are. And what are our inspiration, and whether we're going to be proud or not of our heritage and our history. And never have our history and heritage been taught. Even to this point, it's not being taught. The wonderful contribution that Africa did for civilization, which most of us don't know about. So I took that upon myself, and I go giving conferences to Colombia, to Honduras, to Costa Rica, to Puerto Rico, to Cuba, to Uruguay, of those realities and those contributions. And everywhere you could be surprised of the interest of the people and the blacks of learning about that history, buying the books, coming to the conferences and learning. So if you go to any country, find out what are the groups leading the mobilization, because it's happening in every case. In Honduras, for example, I attended the World Forum on African Heritage, and it was there over 1,000 blacks from all over the world. In Costa Rica, Puerto Limón is a center of Afro-descendants culture, and I mix the conferences on heritage with the conferences on development and economic advancement and taking charge of our responsibility. Now, we are dealing with 5 focus of centers of development. We're doing one in Puerto Rico, of course, in black communities in Puerto Rico. Another one who already initiated in Panama. I visited Colón. Colón is one of the cities in Panama where it's almost 90% black. And you wouldn't believe that that city is right where the ships pass, that the country receives enormous amount of payment for tariff, and it's totally in ruin, not even water available for homes. Thank God there was a new president elected just this month, and immediately that president has committed over $500 million just to develop Colón. So we already developed the structure of a corporation there to what? To train groups in the community to develop businesses or nonprofit. And there is a perception, most people talk like business is the only way to empowerment. Both institutions create jobs, both businesses and nonprofits. And I will add even cooperative. For example, in Venezuela, it's being implemented through the comunas, which are groups, which are nonprofit. But their main target is to develop jobs for the people in the community so that they could be employed and bring revenue and resources and income to their families. So Panama, and then we have the project in Colombia. Colombia, the Pacifico, if you say Pacifico in Colombia, that means black country. And Chocó is the main area. And I was there twice. It's 90% black. But in the main street, not even one black owns a business or an organization there. Why? Because of institutionalized racism. So this brings attention to the interaction of institutionalized racism with empowerment and development of institutions and businesses. But however, it's happening because the first black lady was elected mayor of Quibdó, which is the capital of Chocó, and her main focus has been starting economic development, developing businesses or nonprofits, and training the community to start doing those enterprises. In Africa, we are targeting first Ghana. And in Africa, our target is to develop a development center for manufacturing entrepreneurs. Why? Because Africa, the main problem has been that they have been exporting the raw material. So after you export your raw material, you're giving the jobs outside of Africa. So the jobs are not staying in Africa. Then once those products are developed outside, they are being sold back to Africa, and then we're only consuming. So we are wrong from all points of view that you look at it, and the priority is to developing manufacturing enterprises. Number one, because we retain the raw material in Africa. Number two, because we create the jobs right in Africa to allow people to have jobs and development in their communities. And number three, because then we're not only focusing in consumption, we are focusing in creation of wealth, in creation of capital. And that has been identified as key for our communities to be self-development and self-determining their objective, their goal, and the availability of the resources for the things that has been already identified by African Union, by Dr. Suma, the lady who's now the chair of the African Union, whom I met here in Washington the first time she came, which is peace and governance, good governance, but growth, and specifically reduction of poverty. With those goals in mind, then we are identifying Ghana because of the stability that is there, but still it has 12% unemployment. It has a growth rate that doesn't go beyond 7%, and in many cases 3%. But some of the information that was presented here is to do any project, you have to start with the people in the country. And we have partnered with 2 groups of Ghanaians that are living in New York now, but goes periodically to Ghana and has a counterpart organization in Ghana in 2 of the districts, Kumasi and Mampong. And we are developing the strategic plan with the Ghanaians participating. And yesterday I partnered with Dr. Jeffries, who has already developed a hotel in Ghana and has experience, and with Dr. Julius Garvey, who's the son of Marcus Garvey, that as many of you know, business development and enterprise development was one of his goals, and developed many of these enterprises, but it was stopped short by some of the historical social justice problems that you already identified with. Now, my former background is I was a former dean of a business school in Puerto Rico with 3,000 students and 175 faculty members. And my areas of expertise are accounting and finance. But when I attended Harvard, I attended Berkeley, and I attended Columbia, but I didn't know anything about my African heritage and history. And when I came to United States, I heard Dr. Ben Buchanan. I don't know how many of you have heard of him. And I went to this lecture and I said, what is he talking about? I never knew any of that content. And I, for a whole week, was reading until 2 and 1 o'clock in the morning. And when I finished, I was so devastated because I said, now I understand the book, The Miseducation of the Negro. Because we have really been miseducated. And we don't know our own history and our own heritage. And therefore, we're not aware of our potential to be in charge, to control our resources, and to make our own decisions. So from that moment, I switched from economic and accounting and finance to African history and heritage. I teach at present the course Afro-Latino History and Culture at the City College of New York, and I wrote the textbook for that course. But I learned that you cannot go the other way alone. It has to be economic development together. Because if you don't control the finances and the resources, you're lost. Yeah. So it cannot be history alone. It has to be empowerment, real empowerment, owning the capital and making the decisions. So we started with the project of creating the jobs in the communities, and what do? We announce it, and I have been so impressed. Groups have come. In 1 year, 12 months, we have developed 18 corporations. And as some of the presenters were saying, many of these people have never had experience. And even the people with experience in the United States, 75% bankrupt within the first 5 years of operation, which means you could have all the energy of the world, all the creativity and all the initiative, but we're talking of technical stuff. We're talking of technical training. We're talking of professional skills. And the people have to understand that either you get them or you hire contractor or consultants that will work with you hands in hands to really go through the different stages. The first stage is organization. So what we do is we give them workshops that is a mixture of free and fees, because we need to live too. So some of it is fees, but we are writing proposals because in reality many of the groups don't have the funds. So we have written proposals to see if we get the funds to pay them for some of the fees. For example, incorporation. It comes to about $1,000. Or for example, 501c3 in the case of nonprofit. It comes to about $2,000. And for example, businesses. If it is businesses, you cannot write grants. Although in England, they're starting to do grants for businesses, but in the United States still does not being applied and practiced. So therefore, you have to secure financing and funds either from families or relatives or loans, and you start a business with loan is very aggravating. So I kind of channel the groups to what I think is more fitted for each group. But the key is to have funds immediately to do the planning, because that planning and foundation is critical. Most of the groups go bankrupt because they don't develop the planning, the form of organization, the board of directors, or the experts that are going to be guiding them to kind of design a product production strategy and operational policies and procedures. Marketing, at present you have the branding, you have crowdfunding. We immediately push them into being aware to what IT has to offer and the virtual resources that are available to do the fundraising at a very professional level with little amounts of money. And then the finances, the sources of finances, but above all, financial control. If you do a survey, you find that over 60% of businesses don't do budgeting, don't do planning, and they are surprised to discover at the end of 1 or 2 or 3 years that they are in deficit. But let's not go too far. The same situation happened in the city of New York, or the state of New York, or even the federal government, where we have been reading the news about the incredible deficits that they are incurring, and then they have to go all type of measures to kind of work with it and control it. And of course, we know that for government, the complication is the election and the politics, because nobody wants to cut my budget, cut somebody else, and that presents problem. But the businesses and the nonprofit organization, especially private organizations, have a different structure, and they could do it. But they have to be convinced, especially the head and the leader, convinced of what is the budget, what is the short-term planning and the long-term planning, and not only to have it as a document decorating your office, but a living document. That means you don't do a step unless you check that budget and you make sure that there are resources to do it. Now, those different aspects of operational efficiency and effectiveness are key, and we are working with some of these organizations that are already operating in specifically Ghana, because the purpose is to develop a pilot project that could be replicated throughout different other countries in Africa. And for that, we already have done contact and some commitments of money and resources to develop those teams to do the works. In final conclusion, because I'm one of the persons that has a transportation to take, I believe that it is possible for our communities to create our own jobs. I believe, however, that we, in our case, we agreed to a monitoring of 3 years where we guide them. It's not a seminar and they go and prepare their plan. They are agreed to work and progress, send us progressive reports, and we ask, show me what you did, let me see it. And we have people who are working with us for a fee. I'm pushing that everybody get paid reasonable and get paid for the work that they're doing, because that's another reality that we have in our community. Our people need to be paid well, and therefore they learn to empower themselves, and they could do their work with more love and more dedication and more professional. And besides, then you get top expertise so that the people are guided in the right direction. I invite all of you who has ideas that could help with this project to send me your information. If you want to contact, telephone or email, Falou Foundation is in the web page, and you could give me the card before you leave, or find it in the web page and send me information, and I'll be willing to answer any question. I could be talking 2 or 3 hours, but that's enough for now.
Thank you.
And at the Embassy of Côte d'Ivoire. And I would like to thank the President of Côte d'Ivoire, Dr. Alassane Dramane Ouattara, because not long ago he made a significant financial contribution to help the main university of my country, University of Abomey Calavi, and that helped to build some infrastructure like a classroom. So I hope that you will help transmit this gratitude to our president. So I feel like I should not dare to address the engagement of African diaspora without first thinking about what is causing the African to leave Africa. And then are they really funding what they are looking for abroad? And can we really engage with the African diaspora by trying to focus on those who succeed and they can give back? And finally, I try to show you a little bit what Diaspora Engager, a company I help found, is doing to engage the global diaspora. You know, I know that some of you don't fully know me, so I will try to talk to you a little bit about myself. I come from a small country called Benin in West Africa, and as you may know, Benin is the first democracy in Africa, and in fact, it was from Benin that many countries tried to copy the democracy model. I have seen many refugees, many immigrants in my country, but I never knew that I will be one day living abroad like an immigrant. So myself, I was born and raised in a very large family. I have more than 30 brothers and sisters from the same dad. So quickly, I learned that to succeed in life, I needed to work very hard and count on God, who is able to provide the daily bread for the poor, the needy, the widow, the orphan, and the stranger. So I went to school, and I got my bachelor degree in agronomy, and later my master's degree in agricultural engineering in my country. And my desire to have a greater education and a better life caused me to move to America. So after applying and reapplying for 7 years, I got my green card. Therefore, I migrated to America, the land of opportunity. But how did that go? It did not take too long before my American dream became an American nightmare. In Africa, I used to go to bed at 10 p.m. But when I came to America, the first job I was able to find with my master's degree was a night shift. And I had to take 3 buses before I get to work at 11 p.m. And when I get there, the manager told me that part of my job was in a freezer, and it was in the winter. So when I was in Africa, I never knew that there are freezers big enough to even walk into. So anyhow, I managed to go to work, and because that only job cannot pay the bills, I have had to apply for more jobs. And I see myself doing jobs that does not even require a degree, like a housekeeping job, working in a variety of fast food restaurants. And I was not the only graduate from Africa going through that stage. A very good friend from Nigeria, a PhD from Nigeria, was happy to get that housekeeping job at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel down the street here in DC. And also a medical doctor from Sierra Leone was the doorman, the bellkeeper. And one day, after very hard work, we learned that the president of Senegal was in the room. So that was a big honor. Anyhow, I got disappointed because that's not the America that I hear about. So I decided to go back home. I returned to Africa, and when I get there, I try to explain to my people how is really life in America. Because life in America is not what we see in movie or what people living here are telling us. So they told me, how come can you go to America and return back? What you did not find in America, do you think that you will find it in Africa? So when I tried to explain them reality, they think that I was crazy and that I was a failure. And when I walk down the street, they call me the American. Anyhow, I thought about it, and I prayed about it, and I concluded myself that I need to go back to America. But this time, I know what's waiting for me. So I returned back to America again. And this time, I knew that to succeed, I need to go back to school. So I went to school. And I got my PhD in plant insect and microbiology. Wow. But that PhD, I was with what they call a doctoral marshal. Here we are with all that background, me giving a speech at the commencement, more than 3,000 PhD that day. So for me, that was a big deal. And I didn't even finish my PhD before I got a job offer for a company wanting to pay me more than $100,000 per year, plus company vehicle, plus a lot of benefits. So for me, people may say, okay, it is a dream come true or whatever they say it. I know that down inside me, there is a dream, and that must come true, that must be fulfilled regardless of difficulties or what is going on. So a long time ago, I used to think about how can I help Africa? And I have put some of my thoughts in books, like this one, this one published like 8 or 7 years ago in Canada, addressing pourquoi l'Afrique pleure sans fonds. What I think are the main roots of the African development that later on I published and upgrade here in America. And then I did the book in French, which is trying to address also the big roots of the African problems, like how I see it in America, in Africa, and with other situations. And I noticed that there are at least 14 equations that need to be put into a system of equations so we can really solve the dilemma and the problem that really are putting Africa down. And I don't have the time here to go over all those equations, but for sure, for many reasons, people are leaving Africa, going into adventure with big dreams that they don't really know much about. And I noticed that the bitter truth that we are trying to hide, and people back home cannot either understand us, is that the African diaspora, many of us are hiding from Africa a secret. And that secret is really keeping the African living in Africa in darkness. In a way that we know the African diaspora, we are very smart. We are very smart. You may see some having many bachelors, many masters, but we are not very rich. And we tend not to be really saying that or explaining that to our people in a way that, instead of telling the truth, so that the brain drain, that me I may say brain waste, because I feel like many African intellect, many are wasting their brain, because many are really overqualified for the job they are being hired for. Rarely you will see an African intellect be hired for a job less qualified. They are very smart. So we are hiding that truth in a way that things that can be done to help alleviate brain drain and help our Africa are really sinking us. And those things are keeping us behind. And the consequence, I feel like that kind of situation is misleading many African diaspora engagement efforts in a way that much more we have many naive and innocent Africans that keep migrating, moving every day to Europe, America, Asia, by whatever means they can, by not realizing really what is their fate. And the thing is, many people in Africa, they don't know that the diaspora is not living in paradise. So when we hear about things in movie, or we hear about when people here are telling us, we think that, okay, it's easy to be living there in El Dorado, or how do you call it, or New York, and then we jump into airplane, we jump into whatever means we can, but the dream are not really coming true. But the good news is that not every immigrant fails. Some really succeed, and many even are millionaires. But there are not many. Let's be honest, there are not many. And the thing is, when those who succeed want to engage in activity, the point is, how do they do it? Is it about giving back? Where to give back? And what are the real needs? In a way that they can engage with that sin, corruption, and a lot of other behavior, poison the goodwill. So sometimes I wonder if the diaspora has to be giving fish to Africa. And I was pleased by my friend who is trying to express this idea. Because sometimes when we talk about African diaspora engagement or global diaspora engagement, we tend to bring money first, investment, remittance, African give back, such as those are the ultimate solution. But it seems to me like what he said in this proverb is true and is applying very much to the diaspora and much more African diaspora. You give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. But if you show him how to catch a fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And I was pleased by my friend from Mali that said that the more you give, the more they ask you. And this is a very crucial key point that I think is putting down some of our strategy. And what I'm saying, every continent is having the same problem. Same problem that sometimes is complicated by laws and the strategy that are saying things not really true. So what can we do? I thought about it. When I see my background, when I see what is going on, I think that a platform needed to be built to try to bring all the diaspora together, and also with many other entities that they can work with. This company called Diaspora Engagement that I found is a US-based company, technically trying to connect all the diaspora between each other, not just African diaspora, but the global diaspora between each other, and with government agencies like embassies and consulate, network businesses, laboratories, non-profit, schools, like student and faculty, travel agency, and even with unemployed people, and have this network of those entities working with each other and together in a mutual way. And we do that by focusing on more than 70 areas of interest, which include like advocating for development, brand dream management, business opportunity, networking, collaboration, consulting, education, teaching, diaspora complaints, because sometimes diaspora, by just talking, it can help some. Diplomacy, dating services. There are some folk who will prefer to date people from back home. International affairs, investment and entrepreneurship, help people find a job or have some solutions to their legal problems, and refugee assistance, and science and technology, even volunteering. So we have more than 70 areas of interest. And what we do, we help those diaspora and those entities around them to be working together. And how do we do it? We have a platform, and on that platform, people to use it, they have to register an account. And the registration, the use is free. what we notice is there are many organizations that have a lot of good information, but those things are locked down. If you are not in the network, you cannot get it. So what we do here is to use the site, you create your account, you tell us where you come from, where do you live, what are your expertise, what are your skill. For instance, here is a profile we built based on this company, the University of Lusaka. Once you give us this information, we create your profile, which state your entities, your language, all your area of expertise, area of interest, area of expertise, your continent, your country of origin, how long have you been living abroad, you state all that, and what are you looking for? Because one thing is to have your profile, another is to know what you want. And then what do? We use the profile of each of those users and match them with other users that can fit their preference. And also we have our database where we put opportunities globally. And once a user registers, we know now what that user needs. We inform that user about what kind of thing can help him or her. Because sometimes what lack is the information. People come to America, they don't even know where to go to even begin school. They don't even know who is there, close or far from my country or from east, where is the place. So this kind of platform, it's really high technology. It is a very designed with some high level of computering. And much more, people can go there and post their needs. Okay, it can be for recruiting or job seeking, or a diaspora seeking government, or government seeking diaspora. So we have a bunch of things you can select. You post your need, and you can say, okay, I need this one, or you can say, okay, I want to offer this. And when you do that, you can also specify the requirement of the person or the entity that can benefit your need or offer. You select and fill the form, and then we will save that in our system. And we use, again, your profile and whatever you want to match you with who can help you or who can you help. Because sometimes what lack is the opportunity is there, but we don't even know who can benefit from that opportunity, or you don't even know where to get it. So we are serving like a facilitator, like a one-stop platform for diaspora. And much more people can go there and create a group. You can create a group of the diaspora from Africa living in Washington if you want. You clarify those criteria. And once you do it, we will help you to find people who can really help you in that group. So those are some of the main features, and we have many other things we do behind the scene. And at this point, if I look back and see where I'm coming from and see what I'm doing today, what can I say? Is that we are really trying here to help the diaspora to succeed abroad, because you cannot ask someone to help someone if that person even has succeeded. So our goal is to help the diaspora to succeed so that they can be able to help Africa back or help themselves. Because after all, who are we to try to forget where we come from or what we went through? And we really want that this can be a good place globally. And with all that I'm saying, you may ask me, therefore, what is the secret of the success or the failure of the African diaspora engagement? I will tell you that secret is not a secret, because everything we talk about today, everything I'm saying now, those things are well known. And it is not forum or symposium or conference that will change much. The knowledge is there. But what is lacking, like people already mentioned, is that the desire of the African diaspora and even other diaspora to work together, regardless of our present difficulties or our past wounds. And sometimes I think that many of us are not really patriots. and we try to put our ego first before others or before our continent, and also the same mentality that caused some Africans to leave Africa by force or by will. If that same mentality is still there in us or in them, I think it will be hard to really fully engage the African diaspora. And I believe that, like other speaker said, we need to engage more in win-win partnerships than just trying to beg or ask the diaspora to give back. Honestly, they don't have much. And we need to be realistic with our brothers and sisters so that people can better have a realistic expectation about the move. With that, I will conclude with some few more takeaway. It's not really easy for someone who is driving the car to look in the rear mirror. And I feel like some diaspora are like people driving the car of their life, the car of their dream. That difficulty, they are reaching it. And if we're trying to engage them and ask them to look back, we need to be careful and better understand them, like my friend said. And that will help the false conception we are having about life abroad. We need to help that, improve that. We are very smart, but not very rich. And if you keep talking about money, we may miss the point. And my last slide, Diaspora Engager is, so far, we are the first company worldwide that is really putting every diaspora in one place with all those connections. And we believe that you may have, each of us may have something to take from there. To use it, it's really free. We don't charge you. You just go to this link. You create your profile for yourself, for your diaspora organization, for your companies. And also we have a newsletter we send out. Check it out to receive updates from your country, from us, through the channel that we are linked to. And also we have a blog. You can check it out. We want to hear from you on social media, connect. Our username is the same, Diaspora and Engager. And with that, any question, just email us. Oh, it is free. I don't charge you for anything because we feel like there are many diaspora associations. What they do, they charge the member $100, $200, $50 the least. But how do you want to force me to pay you to come again help you while I'm not even able to pay even my bill yet? So we have other ways to try to fund ourselves, and it is free. And we are not trying to take over any diaspora. We just want to help them because we cannot solve this issue by working in our loneliness. So in summary, we look forward for partnership, collaboration, and if you have any question or suggestion, just email us. And please help us to spread this news, because the more people hear about it, the more we can work on this issue together. So with that, if you have any question or any comments, I will take, and thank you for this opportunity.
How many organizations in your database so far?
Oh, there are several. And every day we are having a very interesting people are going to it. Universities, diaspora across the globe. And although we are new, fairly, it is growing. Yes.
Can we see your 14 equations?
Oh yeah, I can show you after this conference. I can talk to you. It's very complex, and I bet those from my own experience as a scientist, as whatever I went through, and we cannot really solve this situation by just focusing on one equation. It's very complex, and we know it. You know it. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Do you have some cards you wanted to? You know, I'm going to make a quick announcement. One of the things that I've been hearing really at a lot of these events with CFA and the Ron H. Brown series and a lot of organizations is culture and cultural competency. And a lot of times that's what's needed. We have to understand each other on both sides of the equation, not only between African descent individuals here in America, Africa, the Caribbean. And one thing that wasn't mentioned, it's almost like something going on in the Caribbean where I was shocked to hear that a lot of Dominican Republicans are now referring to themselves as blacks. And that's going on down there. You know, it's just something what's going to be happening on October the 2nd, October the 1st, there's going to be a cultural competency presentation. It's going to be with the CFA Ron Brown series. It's going to be at the Homestead Suites from 9 until 12 noon on cultural competency. Come on by and do that. It's going to be engaging African immigrants on health promotion, not only physical health, but mental health, because there's an issue. What happens when the immigrant from Africa comes to America and he doesn't know anything? How is he going to adapt? How does he adjust to what's going on? It's also going to recognize the importance of immigrants' unique concerns regarding health care, health politics, and practices to assist with it's going to find suitable solutions to resist for persistent health disparities, because we have to help that individual and have to set up a support group for that immigrant. A lot of immigrants come here and they don't know who to go to for help. And I think the last time I was here in April, there was a young lady who was in the back of the audience and she had a problem. She had been here over 18 years and she didn't know where to go to get help in a support group. So I got some individuals from my organization, Black Emergency Managers Association, to give this presentation on cultural competency so that these embassies can get involved, so the immigrants don't have to fear that they can go to the embassy and get assistance. There's a support group in the community. I just wanted to bring that up. Our next speaker, what happens is, and I'll let our host know that a lot of individuals had to go travel, and he's got a 12-hour drive. He's got a 12-hour drive, so he had to go. And we wanted to continue on, and if individuals need to take a break, they can. And the next, is Dr. Como here? Did he leave? Dr. Pius Como? He left? Okay, all right. So we're going to continue on based on the agenda. John and Esther Riverson, are they here? They are? Oh, do you have any slides to present? I'm sorry. Do you have any slides? Oh, I can put those in for you. All right.